Alrighty, welcome back everybody to a brand new episode of Shattered Legacies Deep Dive. Now, in episode 1, I did a bit of an introduction. And here in episode 2, I'm not actually going to do what I said at the end of episode 1, which was do a deep dive in the Siritan Empire. Because I got to thinking about it, and I realized that there's something that's far more important for me to kind of explain. And that would be the reality that all this is set in, as well as the magic system. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, a drink, and probably a notepad, because you're going to need to take notes on this one. There's no quiz, but you're going to need to take notes on this one. So we'll start off, once again, we're on Bing Images. I do not own any of these, nor do I claim to own any of these. We're just looking at random space shots, because I still don't have concept art, and I probably never will. But anyway. Also, I have a plate of kale chips, so if you hear crunching, I'm going to try not to do it, but if you hear crunching, that is why. So, we're going to start off with the state of reality. And between the two, it's honestly the easier one and the shorter one. It's one of the reasons why I'm mixing both of these together rather than doing their own individual videos. Reality itself, there's not that much to talk about, simply because it's fairly simplistic. So, let's talk about the barest form of reality, which is a planet. Now, obviously, all of this isn't set on a planet. We've said multiple times that the Siritan Empire is an interstellar empire. But we're going to start simple. So, you start off on a world. And a collection of worlds around a star is a solar system. A absolutely insane collection of solar systems is a galaxy. You know, just like what we live in. We live in the Milky Way galaxy. Closest one I think is Andromeda. Anyway, when you have an insane, near incalculable amount of galaxies inside of one specific region of space, it is, well, the universe. And as we know, the universe is theoretically infinite. Well, in Shattered Legacies, it is confirmed to be infinite. It doesn't matter how far you go off in any direction, there will never be a stopping point. Now, get your tinfoil hats on, because there's a whole multiverse theory here. So there are multiple universes. In fact, there are an infinite number of universes, each universe holding an infinite number of planets. And this infinite number of universes is held within a multiverse. Now, strap on your even bigger tinfoil hat, because we go even bigger than this. An infinite number of multiverses, which has an infinite number of universes in it, which has an infinite number of planets in it, is known as the realm of creation. And it is the largest body that anybody can go to. Now, as I had said in the last episode, gods do exist. And it's important to realize that we as mortals are limited. Even the Siritan Empire, Bastilians, Yvetans, it doesn't matter what race it is. Hell, even the Florians, they're limited to the mindset of a mortal. As a result, the concept of an entire planet is difficult for us to comprehend, let alone an entire universe, and trying to think of a multiverse is completely beyond us. We can't think of something on that sheer of a scale. And to be fair, it's probably pretty easy to say that we can't think of even a universe on that scale. It's a very difficult thing for us as mortals. However, gods are born as gods, and as a result, they have an entirely different mindset. So, like, let's say you're on the very outer reaches of the realm of creation, which, by the way, is infinite, just like the multiverses and universes. But let's say that you're theoretically standing at the edge of it, and you are standing next to a god. For you, it'll just seem like a region of space. It won't look like anything particularly special. But for the god, they can actually see the physical form of what is the realm of creation. But again, that's because they were created with the mind processing capabilities, I guess, of a god. And thus they're capable of comprehending that. They're capable of seeing that. Now, in normal situations, mortals are not capable of going between universes, simply because that's just no amount of technology can do this. Well, Turns out that wasn't necessarily true, because a couple of gods actually did help mortals to transcend universes and go to multiple universes. In fact, if you remember, as I've said, we have universes, multiverses, and the realm of creation. The Siritan Empire, at its largest point, was classified as a multiversal empire. They controlled multiple multiverses, which in each multiverse is an infinite times infinite amount of planets that they have at their disposal. So when we go over the Siritan Empire itself, you'll notice that their economy is absolutely batshit crazy. And that's because when you have an empire that spans such an insane amount of territory, that we cannot begin to fathom it, the supply easily outweighs the demand. And the Siritans aren't the only ones who have done this. The Yvetans, which are probably the second smallest faction, holds a couple of universes. And keep in mind, this is at their absolute pinnacle. This isn't where they currently are, but at the peak of their society, whenever that may have been. The Bastilians have held more territory than the Yvetans, although not by much. They're a multi-universal. They don't quite have an entire multiverse yet, but they do have a few universes under their belt, whereas the Yvetans largely only have one or two. Florians don't possess any universes under their belt, and in fact, they don't possess any planets under their belts either. Dog is barking. And this is because the Florians are largely nomadic. Now, obviously, there's far more of them than 40 nowadays, and I know I'm getting off track, but it's still kind of relevant. They're largely a nomadic, quote-unquote, species that largely stays within their forge ships, and so they don't actually hold any territory. The only territory that they hold is their own ships, and again, we'll get to some more on the Florians when we do a deep dive. Humans hold the second highest amount of territory, but compared to the Siritan Empire at its pinnacle is absolutely minuscule. They held like one or two multiverses, which in of itself is impressive. But to put this into comparison, the Siritan Empire at its absolute pinnacle controlled the majority, roughly 80% of the total territory of the realm of creation. Keep in mind, the realm of creation is infinite. So that tells you just how fucking stupidly massive this Siritan Empire was. So anyway, there was also the Bastilian, or not the Bastilians, the Barramon. They were slightly smaller than the humans, but larger than the Bastilians. Anyway, so now we get to the more specialized forms of reality, and that is dimensions, pocket dimensions, and a little something that we're just going to say other for now. So, dimensions. Dimensions are essentially regions of reality that are semi or completely cut off from the wider realm of creation. And it's because of this that largely only gods have access to these locations. To put this into perspective, one of these dimensions is known as the underworld, or as we as humans would know it better as hell. It is the realm of demons, and the demons themselves are going to require one hell of a deep dive at a later date. But it's interesting because fully self-sufficient dimensions are essentially like a universe. They're completely infinite. But think of those crazy flat earth psychopaths, you know? And for, let's just say a second that the underworld is a planet, and instead of it being spherical, it's flat. Now imagine that there's no curvature. It will never eventually, no matter how far you walk, you'll never eventually reach back to the point that you started at. It just goes off in every direction, all four cardinal directions, infinitely. And it's a very daunting place because, like I said, there are demons there. But that's kind of the philosophy behind what universes are, or dimensions are. Now we get to pocket dimensions. Pocket dimensions are significantly smaller. The majority of the time, they encompass maybe a single room. Gods have their own pocket dimensions which span the size of an entire universe. But where pocket dimensions and standard dimensions differ is the fact that a pocket dimension is sustained by the one who created it, whereas standard dimensions are completely self-sufficient. They don't require any intervention from any other entity. They simply just continue to exist no matter what, unless the dimension is destroyed, which takes a hell of a lot of firepower. Pocket dimensions, on the other hand, like I just said, are completely reliant on its creator and are oftentimes very short-lived. So, like, gods possess an ability known as My Universe, and it basically forcibly drags whoever they want into this pocket dimension of their creation that is literally the size of a universe. And gods do this that way when they do battle with one another, they can destroy as many fucking planets as they want. I'm going to say this right now. Gods are powerful enough to just instantly just fucking annihilate planets after planets. It's crazy. But because they're in a pocket dimension that isn't the actual mainline reality, any damage they do doesn't actually occur. They can destroy Earth in this pocket dimension during a war, but in mainstream reality where we currently inhabit, Earth's perfectly fine. Nothing happened to Earth. They didn't even feel a tickling of the wind, Nothing happened. Now, on to the other tab. And I'm not really going to explain this one because, again, this is another concept that deserves its own deep dive, but I'm going to tell you about it, the fact that it exists, and it's known as the null void. So the very basic premise I can give you is between celestial bodies, i.e. planets and stuff, there is the void of space. And it is absent of the majority of stuff. We as mortal beings are incapable of surviving out there. Even Ciritans who have genetically modified themselves so much that they're considered to be the ideal spacefaring physiology are only capable of surviving like 10 minutes in the void of space before receiving any form of debilitating effects such as asphyxiation, or any of the other horrid things that happen to people when they're in the void of space. But again, that's just kind of how space is. Well, this is only counted when we're talking about in between celestial bodies, between planets, between galaxies, between gas clouds, between black holes, all that stuff. That's just standard, the void of space. The null void, on the other hand, is the region of reality that exists between universes and multiverses. And technically, it doesn't exist, but you can't say that nothing exists within the null void, because that technically, in a really weird way, insinuates that something in fact does exist in the null void, and that something is nothingness. The null void, it's really complicated to understand. It really is. Like, I'm the one who created it, and I understand about 75% of it. The same goes with the magic system, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. But the null void is less than nothingness. In fact, anything that doesn't enter it, that doesn't have its own, bubble of reality around it, is instantaneously removed from reality, as if it never existed in the first place. Like I said, we'll do a deep dive into the null void itself, because it turns out the Ciritan Empire, when given the proper tools and enough determination, has made technology around this null void, and it's terrifying. But anyway, so now that you have a general idea of what reality is like, and like I said, it really didn't constitute a single video, we'll go on to the magic system. And this is where you really need to strap in, because like I said, this is complicated. So, at its very core, magic is just the same as any other magic system. There are technically two resources. There is mana, and there is magic itself. Now, mana is the rawest form of magic. It's basically think of crude oil. When they drill for oil, it doesn't come out as gasoline. It comes out as oil. And then that oil is sent to a refinery where it's refined many times and cracked many times and eventually becomes gasoline or petrol or whatever the hell you call it in your country. Point being is that the same thing happens with mana. Mana is in the air all around us, but the majority of species are intolerant of it or simply can't use it very frequently, whereas other species are capable of using it all the time. And basically, it's as natural as breathing. The body naturally absorbs mana from the environment around it and automatically refines that mana into magic when you are casting the spell. It doesn't just store magic itself inside of you because magic itself is the spell. It's not the thing that is held within you. What is held within you is reservoirs of mana. And so certain species, like I said, are more naturally attuned to magic than others. The Yvetans we talked about are literally the pinnacle of magic. Their entire civilization is capable of using it, no matter how young or how old they are. Everybody can use magic. And on average, Yvetans, like the entire population, Yvetans have the highest yield of magical quality. That being said, they're not particularly powerful, especially compared to some of the absolute powerhouses that exist in Shattered Legacies, which we'll get to those when we do the Siritan Empire deep dive, and each of those characters themselves requires their own deep dive. But anyway, followed up closely behind them is the Siritans. Not everybody in the Siritan Empire can use magic, but the majority of them can, but it's typically generally use, like, why would I bring a flint and steel or a fire starter to light this campfire when I can just light the campfire on fire with a click of my fingers? It's not necessarily magical spells on the level of like military capabilities. Next up we have the humans. It's very uncommon for a human to be able to use magic. And when they can, they usually can't use it very well. However, there have been statistical outliers. Individuals who have quite literally reshaped the understanding of how magic works. At least during the time that those individuals rose to power with their magic. Next up, we have the Barramon and Bastilian, which, interestingly enough, are completely incapable of utilizing magic. There's never been an instance in either of their species that they could actually use magic. But the Barramon are weird. So, for people who can't use magic, there's two different items that they can use. And the humans use both of them quite frequently. The first is magical spells, and the second is spell stones. So magical spells, not magical spells, spell scrolls, sorry. Spell scrolls are literally runic magic that is placed onto a parchment of paper, and basically you just channel mana into it. Everybody, save for the Bastilians and Barramon, who are completely intolerant of magic, everybody has a reservoir of mana. But if you don't have that magical aptitude, you can't cast a spell. And that's what's important here. So, the Bastilians, they don't have any mana reservoir. They don't have any storage of mana in their bodies. Yet somehow, despite the fact that it is required to push at least a small amount of mana into these scrolls so that the spell activates, the Barramon can somehow do it regardless. And all magical theorists and magical scientists are at a complete loss of words of how the Bastilians can do this. Now, an important detail is that they can't cast spells on their own. Like a human that can actually use magic, there are multiple different ways. In fact, there are 4 different ways of casting spells that they can utilize to actually fire a spell, like from their hand or something. Bastilians and Barramon can't do that. But like I said, they can use spell stones and, interestingly enough, magical scrolls when it comes to Bastilians. Now, what is a spell stone? A spellstone is basically a very brittle and fragile gemstone that has a spell inscribed onto the inside of the crystal via basically magical lasers, kind of, you know? And so basically how it works is it doesn't require any magical aptitude whatsoever, nor does it require you having a mana reservoir, which is why the Baramon are capable of utilizing them. Basically, you take this spellstone, and you throw it at the ground, or you throw it at whoever you're targeting. And the second that it hits anything, it shatters because it's so brittle. And it basically, in that instant, gathers a massive burst of mana. It basically sucks it in like an implosion, and then the spell activates and causes the spell to actually occur. Now, obviously, there are certain spells that this isn't really feasible to be used. Others are considered to be just a little bit too inhumane to be used in that fashion, specifically like something like a fireball. Like if we're talking like a Dungeons and Dragons fireball, that's a little inhumane, because if you throw it at the ground on your feet, you're just going to blow yourself up. And if you throw the spell stone at somebody, you're just going to blow them up. And it just, not the smartest idea, So there are a lot of limitations to what spell stones can actually do, but they still possess an incredible amount of utility. In fact, even incredibly powerful mages will oftentimes carry these things on them because it requires no mana to cast these things. You can just throw out a big cluster of them and just use it to defend yourself or cover your retreat. They're really useful. Now, on to actual how you cast spells. And there are 4 different methods. The first is silent spell casting. And it's exactly like it sounds. You basically focus on the feeling of how the spell feels and functions, and you cast it. It is the fastest way to cast spells, but it's also the weakest, because you're basically just taking mana, transforming it into the rough shape of what the magical spell is supposed to look like, and launching at your opponents. Obviously, yes, that is incredibly fast. You can rapid fire this shit. But it's not super powerful is the problem. Next up is known as incantation or worded magic, which is a really weird way of saying that, but you'll understand why in a second. Now, this is technically 2 different ways of casting the same type of spell. So we'll start off with worded magic, and this is your stereotypical, you announce the spell that you're about to use to your enemies right before you fire the spell, so they know exactly what to expect, because you're a fucking idiot that just said the name of the spell. That's worded spell casting. It's slightly slower than silent spell casting, but a little bit more powerful, because now you're giving the word of what this spell is supposed to be, which gives it just a little bit more substance. Next up, you have incantation magic, which, as you can imagine, you recite an incantation. Think, what's a great example? Think of those weird spell things that they used in Bleach. Like, if you've watched the anime Bleach, you'll know exactly what I mean. I don't remember the name of them, of those little weird magical spell things, but, the incantations that they say is kind of the same thing. It is a series of sentences that you recite, and, again, it's significantly slower than silent and worded spell casting, but the amount of power that you get from them is astonishingly higher. But obviously, this means that you're completely incapacitated whilst you're reciting the incantation. You don't want to move too much, because otherwise you might forget where you currently are, and you can't defend yourself because you're literally getting ready to cast a spell. It's very risky. The third type of spell casting is known as runic spell casting. And this is basically where this is the hardest type of magic. It's the longest type of magic, but it's also the hardest hitting type of magic, and some truly insane shit can occur from runic magic spells. So basically, the way that this works is you have to, through very intricate and delicate designs, you make a circle, And inside the circle, like you said, you make very intricate and delicate designs that basically work sort of like a circuit board. It channels the mana in specific patterns, weaving a very specific and very powerful type of spell. And these spells are just absolutely insane. And it's one of the ways that you can actually craft your own unique magics. Now, for somebody to be able to actually craft a new, unique type of magical spell is insanely difficult. And the problem with runic magic is that although it is powerful, each rune can only be used once. Once that rune is used, it can't be used again. Technically, it can be, but that specific instance of it can't be used again. And oftentimes, you can think of kind of like, what the hell was his name? Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist. How he always has the alchemical symbol on his glove, you know, and later in the series, spoiler alert, he ends up carving it into the back of his hand. It's sort of a very similar thing. Runic mages will oftentimes write it down on a piece of parchment, and all they have to do is channel magic into it. In casting, it's as fast as silent spell casting. It instantly activates, but the reason why it's the longest is because you have to meticulously draw and craft every single one of these runes. To be fair, it's insanely time consuming, but the power that you get from it easily outweighs the amount of time that you spend drawing these things. The fourth and final type of spell casting is very specific. I don't quite want to say niche, but it's very specific, and it's known as form magic. And basically, you take an element, and the problem with form magic is that it's always the same. Like, if you're running form magic against somebody who's using, say, worded magic, they instantly have an advantage over you. Apologies, I had to yawn. They instantly have an advantage over you. Let's say that you're using lightning form magic. The problem with form magic is it's incredibly powerful, but it's predictable. Because for lightning form magic, there are 8 specific spells. Every lightning form magic user uses the exact same 8 spells. And that's the problem with it. But the advantage that it has is that these spells are highly compatible with one another. You know, with normal spells, I don't quite want to say a cooldown timer, but that's honestly kind of what it is you have a specific amount of time that you have to wait before you can cast another spell. And that's simply because usually the spells that you're using for any other type of magic aren't really that well compatible with one another. Whereas with form magic, they are incredibly compatible with each other, where you can literally string them instantaneously together. You know, cast form 4, and then instantly followed with form 8, followed up with form 1, just instantly, bam, 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 bam. And it's a very high-paced, constant type of onslaught-like magic. But the downside to it is, one, it's very predictable, because as soon as they find out what your element is, they instantly know what spells you're going to use. They may not know what sequence you may be using them in, but they know what spells you have. Oh god, another yawn, I apologize. The second one is that, compared to all other magic casting types, form magic requires significantly more mana in order to cast these spells, which is a great segue into how mana works. So basically, when it comes to mana, there is a specific amount of mana that you can hold in your body. And this is the limits of essentially your mana reservoirs. And as you cast spells, you use more and more and more of that mana reservoir. Now, your body naturally, but very slowly, absorbs mana from the air around you to replenish your, essentially, pools of mana that you have inside of you. in order to cast spells. Some mages have discovered how to intentionally and actively draw massive quantities of mana from their environment, very quickly replenishing them. But these are oftentimes exceptionally skilled mages that have been doing this shit for a very long time. But there is actually it's not quite a disease, but a side effect to using too much mana, and this is known as mana deprivation. And basically, when you use too much mana and your body isn't replenishing it fast enough, you essentially start to suffer from symptoms similar to vertigo. You become very lightheaded, the room starts to spin because mana is considered to be a vital part of the body. If your body is compatible with collecting and storing mana, it's essentially as important as blood is. And so if you start using too much of your mana, you can have debilitating effects. Like I said, dizziness, all the symptoms of vertigo. The further that you go, the more dire these become until you can just suffer from outright death, from organ failure, because when you're a being that is capable of accepting mana into the body, the mana it's not an organ. It's not like the lungs, how the lungs can hold air. It's literally circulated through the entirety of your body, and it's interwoven like silk threads into the entirety of your body, which means if you use too much of it, your body basically becomes reliant on the fact that there is mana there, even though technically it has no reason whatsoever to rely on the mana, and thus it can lead to organ failure as a result. So any mages have to be very careful about just how much mana they are utilizing in a battle, and that's one of the reasons why in Shattered Legacies, the sword is mightier than the wand. Because, yeah, if you're using a sword, you have your own endurance, you have your own stamina that you have to worry about. But if you're really good at dodging and not using a lot of energy in dodging, you can easily outpace a mage. Because you can recover your stamina much faster than a mage can recover their mana. Now, obviously, there are ways around this. There are things like mana boosters and mana potions. Mana potions is fairly self-explanatory. It's basically a liquid concoction that will give you a short burst of mana as well as a side effect of a short burst of energy in the form of like stamina, so you essentially become more hyper as a result. Whereas mana boosters temporarily raise the limit of the amount of mana your body can store, and these usually last a few days at most. That way your body can fully absorb up to its new maximum level and hold it there for a few days. So now let's go over the actual fundamentals of how magic works. So when you're born, let's say that you're born with a high aptitude in magic. When you're born, everybody is assigned a specific element. And when I say element, I don't necessarily mean, fire, air, water, earth. There are some crazy ass elements out there. You could have light magic. You could have chain magic. You could have gravity magic. You could have time magic. You could have dimensional magic. You can straight up have necromancy or be like a druid. Like, there are so many different types of magics. It's literally limitless. The possibilities are endless, is what I'm trying to say. And whatever magic that you're born with is considered your primary magic. As you continue as a mage, you're going to grow the fastest with your primary magic. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use your primary magic. There are certain people who, let's say, for example, you're afraid of fire, but fire is your primary magic. You don't have to use it. You can have up to a maximum of 6 different magics. Now, obviously, the other 5 magics that you have, they're going to become stronger much slower than your primary magic. But basically, when you use your magic enough, you have the possibility of evolving your magic to a new level. So, like, you can evolve, let's say, water magic into typhoon magic. You can upgrade your ice magic into, I don't know, any form of upgrade of ice magic. But the problem is that every single time you evolve your magic, you gain one less maximum amount of magics that you can use. So now, let's go back to our original analogy. You were born with fire magic, but you're not afraid of fire, so you dabble into fire magic, and you end up evolving your fire magic. Now suddenly, instead of having access to 6 different elements of magic, now you have 5. And if you decide to evolve your fire magic again, now you have 4. Now let's say, okay, well, I need to specialize in something else. Let's do wind magic, and I evolve that. Now you have 3 different. And you decide to evolve wind magic again. Now you only have 2 magics. And when it gets to this point, especially if multiple are evolved, if you decide to continue to dabble into wind magic, suddenly your fire magic devolves to the previous tier, because you're specializing in that wind magic. And for a lot of mages, this is detrimental because it basically locks them out of progress for anything else. Now, obviously, certain types of magics you can't evolve more than once, but there are quite a few different types of magics that can. Now, there's a different type of magic. There's 2 different types of magic known as unique magic as well as trait magic. Now we're going to do unique magic first. Unique magic is basically, fire magic is a perfect example because there's a character who possesses a unique form of fire magic. And basically, it's not necessarily, oh, I have evolved fire magic 5 times. If I evolve it the 6th time, it will become a unique magic. No, it's more like you were born with fire magic, but you were destined for this unique form of fire magic. So the first time you evolve that fire magic, it would become that unique form. The problem with unique magic is it makes you completely and utterly incapable of utilizing any other element of magic. Now, that sounds incredibly detrimental, especially for something like arcane magic, which is a type of element that doesn't technically use one of those 6 initial slots. People who have specialized heavily into 2 or 3 different types of magics that aren't capable of learning any other types of magics other than those 3, they can still use arcane magic, because arcane magic is basically the purest form that magic can take, is the most basic it can be. And there's a lot of utility in there, as well as a few defensive spells and offensive spells. So it's a good thing to have. But when you get a unique magic, it gates you from even using that arcane magic. Now, here's the thing. That's obviously a really big problem, but the sheer spike in terms of capabilities from a non-unique magic to a unique magic is so absurd that it doesn't matter at that point. For example, when we get to the Siritan Empire and we get to his deep dive, we're going to be talking about an individual known as Duran Bosmer. Duran Bosmer is easily the most OP-ass motherfucker you have ever heard of. He puts basically every anime protagonist to shame. And he has a really bad personality. I'm not going to get too far into him, but he has a unique type of magic known as molten magic. Now, I'm going to use Duran as an analogy here because now we're going to traits. And it's important for Duran because he not only has a unique magic, but he also has a trait. Now, what is trait magic? Once again, when you're born, you have an incredibly low chance that you'll be born with a trait. And basically what this is, it's kind of like a guidebook of how you're most likely going to be living your life. It's not necessarily hard rules that this is how you are going to live your life, but traits have everything from really bad traits that are oftentimes considered to be more of curses rather than blessings to insanely powerful traits that can just change the game and your life. For example, you can get an incredibly common trait, which one that a lot of people have, and it's the most common trait of all, having a green thumb. Not a literal green thumb, but having a green thumb in the sense that you're really good at taking care of plants. That's actually a trait. That's not just a skill that you have. But people don't realize that it's a trait. Now, obviously, in real life, trait magic doesn't exist. If you are good with plants, that means you're just good with plants, you know? But in Shattered Legacies, having a green thumb, you get the trait green thumb. There are other more really rare ones, such as the Sage trait, which completely violates the rules of magic. So you remember how I said that you're locked at a maximum of 6 different elements of magic? The Sage allows you to use every element of magic, and there's only one person who is allowed to have this trait at any given time, and she's still alive, by the way. Now, let's get to Duran, and we're going to go over another character who also has a trait. So, to be born with a trait is very, very rare, especially when we're talking about the Silverton Empire. At its height, to say that it had decillions upon decillions of citizens is lowballing the shit out of their population. And for anybody who doesn't know what decillion is, numbers go like this: ones, tens, thousands, millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, quintillions, sextillions, septillions, octillions, nonillions, decillions. And technically there's undecillion, dodecillion, but we're not getting into that. We're not getting into big numbers. That's not why we're here. So saying that decillions upon decillions of inhabitants exist, or people exist within the Silverton Empire, like I said, is lowballing the shit out of that number, because the Silverton Empire at its pinnacle was a holder of like 75% or whatever number I had said earlier amount of the realm of creation. Like, it was insane. And roughly only like 5% of their population was actually born with a trait, excluding really common ones. You know, when it comes to the most common of traits, something like green thumb, everybody has it, you know? And it becomes so common that people forget that it's actually technically a trait. So, to be born with a trait that is recognized as a trait, only like 5% of the Silverton population at the time had traits. And to be born with a powerful trait is even rarer. It's basically like winning the lottery after you bought like 20 lottery tickets. You know, that's pretty damn lucky, you know? And Duran was similarly on that. He has a powerful trait, but he's also very unique. So when it comes to traits and normal magics, they don't mix, you know? You can't mix your trait with your magic. Now, obviously, certain traits are naturally mixed with them, such as, again, Sage, which gives you access to every element of magic with no limitation on how many that you can use at any given time. But they don't meld together unless you're Duran. People who specialize in magical experimentation and magical science don't really understand what the hell happened to Duran, but thank God it did. So he has molten magic, which at its purest form, molten magic allows for the manipulation of molten material. That's it. It doesn't allow you to produce molten material, it just allows you to move it around. That's it. And it sounds like a horrible, unique type of magic. You can move lava. Whoop-de-doo. Who the fuck cares? You got fucking one of the other insanely OP characters over there who can literally destroy a planet with a click of his fingers with a single spell. And Duran is sitting over here like, I can move lava like I move sand with a pail. It's like, that's not impressive. That is until you realize what his trait is, and thank God that his trait melded with his magic. His trait is known as Thermospike, and basically it constantly raises the ambient temperature around Duran to a limitless level. Within minutes, the temperature around his body is so hot, it will nearly instantaneously cause the atmosphere of the planet to catch fire and combust. Within a number of hours, the ambient temperature around his body would reach such insane temperatures that the universe he inhabits would most likely suffer a heat death. Now, it should be noted that there are other people who have been born with thermospike before, and obviously this kind of stuff hasn't happened before. But that's simply because when it comes to traits, there's two important things. What trait you have, and what grade your trait is. So basically, you can think of grading like your grades at school, D through A. And so 90% of the people, well, actually 99% of the people who have ever had thermospike, they basically had D rank. It warms the area around them, but that's about it, Eventually, it may become uncomfortably warm to stand next to them, but it doesn't raise any higher. Duran essentially hit the fucking lottery and got like triple S tier because he can just cause the heat death of the universe. But in Duran's instance, and again, nobody knows how he did this because magics and traits do not meld. Unless you're Duran, where his magic and his trait apparently were compatible enough, again, winning the fucking lottery, where they melded together so that he, at birth, which thank God he had it at birth, he was capable of controlling this heat. Now, you may think, okay, but we're talking about an infant at birth. They don't necessarily understand the physics of magic and how to control a trait. You would be correct. But at that young of an age, it was basically automatic. His body knew, I don't want to burn myself, or however you say that in baby gibberish, and basically self-regulated itself until he was old enough to start to understand what his magic was and regulated himself consciously. And Duran has been doing this for such an insanely long time. Spoiler alert, the dude is trillions of years old. The dude is insanely old. He doesn't look a day over 45. Like, it's crazy. But, he's been doing this for so long that he can now just unconsciously do it in, like, the back of his mind. He's not even thinking about it, and he can spike the temperature. Now, when we go over Duran and his molten magic, you'll see why this is such an ungodly powerful combo. But unfortunately, I'm going to tease you guys and leave that there for Duran. The other character that we're going to talk about when it comes to traits is an individual known as Rex, who basically won the greatest lottery of all time. Like, he literally went to the gas station, the first lottery ticket he ever bought in his entire life, and won the fucking Powerball, and just got millions upon millions of dollars. That was Rex. Because like I said, for how insanely rare it is for somebody to get a trait that is recognized as a trait and to get one that is powerful, Rex basically got legendary status. He didn't get powerful. He went all the way up to the pinnacle, which is why I said that he won the legendary lottery, And what's even more impressive is Rex wasn't born with one trait. He was born with two. And both traits are considered to be curses because of what they do and just how powerful they really are. Rex possesses the traits known as Infinity and Immortal. We'll go over Immortal first. Basically, Rex can't die. You can disintegrate him. You can straight up turn his entire being into their base subatomic particles. He will come back. And basically, he's incapable of dying and has near instantaneous regeneration regardless of the amount of damage his body sustains. You can rip off his arm at the shoulder, and within, like, literally 2 seconds, the arm is back. fully working like you never took the arm off to begin with. You can decapitate him, and either the body will grow out of the head or the head will grow out of the body. Either case, he's back. He's not dead. Like I said, you can disintegrate him to base subatomic particles and he will regrow within a few minutes. It's wild. And you can see why this is considered to be a curse, because there are people like myself who possess a phobia known as thanatophobia. It's basically death anxiety. And so for people like us, the concept of being immortal is very appealing until you really realize what that means. That means that if you are technically immortal, and depending on what description of immortal we're talking about, you could either be biologically immortal, so eventually if you just got sick of it, you could just shove yourself into the forever box, or if you have the bad type of immortality, you just straight up can never die. You will never fade until the end of time, space, and reality. You will exist, And unsurprisingly, mixed with the other trait that he has known as infinity, Rex has gone completely insane. Now, for the other trait known as infinity, and we will have a deep dive on Rex at a later date, but what infinity does is it basically... So, this is also an important segue. There are specific limits to what the body of a mortal is capable of handling. And there are two different limits known as a soft limit and a hard limit. Soft limits are basically like, think Dragon Ball Z. Whenever one of the main characters breaks past their ceiling, they broke past their limits and they are capable of continuing progressing and getting stronger. That's what a soft limit is. It's basically a slow progression of gaining strength. Because if you gain a massive burst of strength, your body could potentially rip itself apart because you're handling more than what your body is naturally capable of slowly adjusting to be able to handle. The hard limit, on the other hand, is basically this is the absolute maximum what your body can handle. If you ever find even a way to go beyond your hard limit, your body will rip itself apart because your body is basically like trying to push your physical strength beyond what you can handle, like getting to the point where you throw a punch and every single bone in your fist and arm is instantly shattered to dust. That's what happens when you go over your hard limit. And what infinity does is it removes those limits. And it doesn't have a restriction on how fast that power can build up and spike. Which means that every single time he enters battle, he receives a literal inconceivable amount of pain as his body instantly basically rips itself apart at the seams, but because he has immortal, his body instantly regenerates all the damage, so he's literally living there to the ends of eternity in perpetual, unimaginable agony. And this is why he's gone completely insane. He won the fucking lottery of the lifetime, and he is suffering for it. Again, we'll get into Rex at a later date when we actually do his deep dive. But so, that's kind of it. There's probably a few more details that I'm forgetting, but again, my dumbass doesn't write all this stuff down on a notepad, so at a later date, we may do a revision video where I come back and, add to certain things that I remember or add to the lore to make it more unique and stuff. But as of right now, that is it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this explanation of the reality of Shattered Legacies as well as the magical system. In the next episode, I promise you this time, we are going to be going over the Siritan Empire and doing a deep dive. And just like today's episode, it's going to be a long one. I can tell you right now, my voice is ravaged right now. I'm not used to talking for this long. I said in the first episode that I wasn't used to talking, and I didn't realize it was only 20 minutes, but I had also completely forgotten that I had recorded a video. So I'm recording this on the 26th, a Thursday, and tomorrow, obviously, there's a video coming out on Friday, and for you guys, it will have been last week, but for me, it's tomorrow. And like when I did the first episode of Shattered Legacies Deep Dive, I had forgotten. I don't know how the fuck I forgot this in the moment, but I had forgotten that I did that video recording before then, so my voice was just already wrecked. It is ravaged now, and I need so much water, and I need to let my voice recover for a little while. But regardless, I absolutely love doing this more than I thought I would. I hope that you guys enjoy, and I hope that you guys are looking forward to more Shattered Legacies lore, because there is so much fucking lore. Oh my god, there is so much fucking lore. Like, 52 episodes, not going to be enough. And that's a year's worth of videos for Shattered Legacies Deep Dives. It's not going to be enough. I can promise you that. Like, in terms of just sheer raw hours, this series is probably going to be the king on my channel for until I stop doing YouTube. Like, each and every single episode, there's probably going to be so much for me to talk about. There's probably going to be multiple hours long. I don't even know how long I've been recording on this one. I'd have to go over to OBS, but I'm currently doing a screen capture. So if I do that, all of a sudden, you're just going to get tunnel vision of OBS overlay with OBS overlay just to infinity. And I don't want to subject you guys to that. So however long this video has been, this is how long it's been. So anyway, yeah, I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you guys are looking forward to hope you guys are looking forward to more episodes of Shattered Legacies. As of the time of this being posted, there will have been 2 videos of the series coming out, as well as tomorrow's, for you guys, video of our new series, and then the Friday, and then the following, we will have Saturday and Sunday, which, if I am remembering correctly, is 4th of July weekend. I think I have my time. I think I have my schedule right. 4th of July weekend. I don't know if I will be streaming 4th of July weekend. We'll find out. But regardless, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. See you guys.